Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with another replay for today. Someone had requested on the very first replay I did dwarves, and then they specified on last night's recording that they wanted to see dwarves with artillery, which isn't the easiest thing to do. It can be a little hard, but here down in the Charnel Valley, which separates the area of Lamia and Kalida's home from the rest of the Tomb King Empire, we are meeting the Norskins on the field of battle. So, just go over army comp real quick. Because I have artillery, I had to be a little creative with my army. And knowing that I'm going up against Norska, you don't really need any AP against Norska. What you really need is enough shooting to really tear them up before they get to the front line, and then a bunch of really high melee defense and armor to basically hold them in place. So my front line consists of 2 units of Longbeards on either flank, 2 units of Dwarf Warriors in the near center, and then of course holding up the true center is a unit of Ironbreakers, who are fantastic against Norska between the their throwing satchels being a very, very powerful tool. Because you can just do a bunch of damage for the Norskins to get into the fight and get their physical resistance buff. Then, of course, we've got a unit of Giant Slayers, because when you're fighting Norska, they're going to have things that are big. So having a really strong anti-large unit is very helpful, and these guys just have a killer stat line. Then for character support, we've got a Runesmith with just the Rune of Negation, Rune Wrath of Ruin. The Dwarves are already a pretty high armor faction, and if Norska, if they can't get through my armor, the plus 30 armor spell isn't probably going to help that much. And if they are running strong armor piercing, then it's also not going to help that much. Against some factions it's useful, but I don't think against Norska. Then for Ungrim Iron Fist is our Lord in this dark time, because who better to go up against the ultimate monster faction than the ultimate monster slayer? Of course, he's unbreakable. He has Death Blow, Deadly Onslaught, Red Ruin, and the Axe of Dargo. And then last, because I'm running a significant amount of artillery and shooting, I got the Dwarf Engineer, who I actually think is a really good character on his own. Though, if you don't have artillery, you kind of want to shave some of his abilities off. But he's got the rare combination of armor-piercing missile and weapon damage, which is really nice. And then he has Extra Powder, the Prospector's Spyglass, which gives a accuracy bonus, Ballistics Calibration, which gives a further accuracy bonus and makes the reload time shorter, and then Entrenchment, which gives physical resistance, so you can use it defensively, but most importantly, it gives plus 40% armor-piercing missile damage. So if you cast it on, like, say, a Goblobber, or on your Thunderers, it can make them do a pretty substantial amount of damage. Then from artillery, I have a cannon, and of course the Goblobber, who's just fantastic in most matchups. And then for range, I have 1 unit of Bugman's Rangers, who are kind of the ultimate defense unit for the dwarves. When it comes to artillery, they can do substantial damage, and because of their regeneration and their fairly good stat line, they can hold the line really nicely. If, push comes to shove. Then I've got a group of Thunderers, because they are an excellent counter to the more monstrous creatures like Fimmer. And last but not least, I've got a regular unit of Coilers. My opponent deployed down here. This map's always kind of tricky, because you kind of have to try and figure out where your opponent's going to show up. But I decided to go with up here because on my line, the largest hill up here is this one right here. And I could almost deploy on top of it, so I just deployed behind it and started walking up. He's got 2 units of Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes, a unit of Norscan Ice Trolls, buzzards. Then he's got 3 units of Monster Hunters with throwing axes, which between their Shield Breaker and Armor Piercing are pretty dang good against dwarves. Then he's got a mix of 3 units of Marauders with great weapons, and then 2 Marauder Champions with some chevrons kind of spread around. Then he's got a Fimmer Balefiend with the Lore of Shadows, a Marauder Ice Wolf Chariot, and then a Marauder Chieftain on a Mammoth, which is a pretty bold pick against dwarves. On one hand, he has amazing damage and can really chew through the dwarves if you can keep him safe, but it's kind of a big if. So in any event, so my opponent, I think, was expecting me to deploy down here, so I'm assuming he was hoping, he deployed these guys as close as he could to my line, hoping he could go around the back, but unfortunately for him, I'm up here, and I have arc weapons with my crossbows, so I immediately just start shooting into him, which my Master Engineer is already giving that extra powder and that extra powder bonus, as well as the Prospector Spyglass to these crossbows, which means they do extra armor piercing. Oh, no, that's only explosion damage. But the plus 18% accuracy is very useful. And then, of course, I pop Ballistics Calibration, because pretty much everything's in range. The cannon, which is now on the highest sand dune in this area, is taking shots at the cav, and then will absolutely annihilate them. Meanwhile, as he's having to come up this ridge, beautiful. We have just a perfect arc with the Goblobber, which, yeah, it's doing considerable damage. This Fimmer comes around the corner, and the Lore of Shadows is a pretty powerful lore, especially if you have Pendulum, which he does. An Overcast Pendulum can really hurt a dwarf line. So the moment I see that he's a Shadow Wizard, I start staggering my line, and he does use a Pit of Shades here, but I managed to mostly get out of the way. It does a little damage to these Iron Breakers and Dwarf Warriors. I wonder if he overcast that, because actually it's some substantial damage to the Iron Breakers, despite the fact that a good portion of the unit avoided the damage. In any event, he moved most of that stuff out of range of my cannons, but they're still firing pot shots at this Shadow Wizard, which, because of the Prospector's Eyeglass and the additional explosion radius, when the cannonball connects with the ground, it is having a very easy time hitting him, just because that Engineer is buffing so well. He did sneak his Ice Wolves around the back, which is actually going to prove to be dangerous for me in a moment. So I start moving all my ranged units into position. He's keeping his Mammoth hidden down here, which is really smart, so I can't just hit it with all my shooting attacks. I have to wait until he gets a little closer. And here, I could have given him time to pretty much set up against me, but I realized that no, it's much better to catch him on my terms. So I run forward to get the counter charge, mainly so that, you know, his formation wasn't like in a nice big fancy line. So here we're getting a little bit of friendly fire with these explosions, but you know, they are hitting these Marauder with great weapons and pretty much almost breaking them instantly. Over here, I pop a Rune of Wrath and Ruin on the Marauder Horsemen with throwing axes, and the cannon starts laying into them. Pendulum goes down there, but that's not going to do too much. Ungrim has popped all of his buffs and is trying to wail on this Marauder Chieftain. There he did about 2,000 damage. Not 2,000. 200 damage, easy. He knocked, you know, every time he lands a slap, he knocks about 300 to 400 damage off, easy. So at this point, I've noticed the wolves standing behind me, so as the Thunderers are firing at the Mammoth, I turn all of my units here around, and the cannon, and start firing shots. He's going to get into the Goblobber, unfortunately, but between the Engineer shooting and all these guys, now that Ballistics Calibration is up, they're going to be able to do damage here really well. At this point, I turn the cannon around because I don't want to risk hitting my own War Machines, because hopefully they'll rally. The Iron Breakers pretty much cleared out everyone in front of them with explosions, though these Marauder Champions did beat my Warriors and are passing through, but of course the Iron Breakers are on them like butter on toast. Meanwhile, this unit is broken and we're just sort of focusing it down. Every time I get the chance, I am popping my, what's that ability called? Entrenchment on these Thunderers to give them that huge buff to their armor-piercing damage, especially since they don't need to move. At this point, there was a group of Norscan Ice Trolls, but the Giant Slayers got into them with a counter charge and just tore them limb from limb. Here, the cannon just sort of point-blank shoot these guys, is going to shoot those horsemen in the face and just delete them. And once they decide that it's time to go, we start focusing all of our efforts on the Mammoth. Because even with the Thunderers consistently pot-shotting him and Ungrim kind of wailing on him, he's still above 50% health. Obviously, as all three of these units start combining their efforts, and the cannon also starts firing at him, even though it missed and hit those axe throwers, you know, it just has a lot of health. So I start focusing my effort trying to get rid of all these hunters here. The Giant Slayers are of course into them, and the Goblobber's going to start firing. Runesmith has just been offering support magic here and tossing down Wrath and Rune every once in a while. I tell all the range units to focus on the champions because they're kind of the final bastion here. And with the Goblobber's leadership debuff, complete surround, and the Lord pretty much being dead, the Lord is going to break. And the moment he breaks, he basically just immediately suffers army losses. And the loss of a central leadership figure collapses the entire army. So I want to say great game to Slay Turtle. Unfortunately for him, you know, on that map, you pretty much always want to deploy on the high ground, just because the high ground will give you a natural advantage, even if because if your opponent has the low ground and you have the high ground, if you have any shooting units, you're going to be able to hit him. And if he decides to and if he decides to come for you in the center and you go meet him in the center, you're going to be going downhill, so you'll have an advantage with your charge as well. So on that map, Charnel Valley, it's typically better to always deploy on the high ground and then send your advanced units on the low ground to go around behind them. So he took a bit of a gamble with that, and unfortunately it just didn't work out for him. As far as kills go, leadership was mostly supportive, but did a good job. Master Engineer killed a couple people with his rifle. Ungrim didn't kill anyone because he was too busy wailing on the Marauder Chieftain the whole time, but he did a pretty substantial amount of damage to him. The Dwarf Warriors, this unit took a pretty nasty charge and just got completely shut down, as did this unit. You could tell the two units that fought the Marauder Champions because they didn't really get any kills and they also just kind of got deleted. The Ironbreakers did amazing. They managed to earn a chevron for themselves, and they absolutely butchered a Marauder Champion with a great weapon unit just by throwing blasting charges at them. And then, of course, once they got into the fray against the Marauder Champions, they were easily the better fighter. Longbeards did well. I mean, they held the line. This unit got a ton of kills fighting against just some Marauder Champions' great weapons, because even though they have great weapons, the Longbeards' melee defense is high enough that they can trade really favorably. The Giant Slayers, of course, did phenomenal and got 2 chevrons. They took out the Ice Trolls single-handedly, and the Ice Trolls only managed to kill 2 of them. And they also cut up quite a few of the Axe Throwers in the end there. Spoilers both did really well. They defeated the Ice Wolf Chariots for me, who only managed to get 3 kills on the crew of the Goblobber, and managed to, you know, chase them off. And then they did an excellent job kind of focusing down individual annoying targets and helping folks fight the Marauder Chieftain. The Thunderers did a great job when this Marauder Champion unit broke through by killing off these Dwarf Warriors. The Thunderers just immediately told them to start firing while the Ironbreakers were chasing these guys from behind. And if you have Ironbreakers shooting into your Thunderer shooting into somebody's back, it just does so much damage. Then last but not least, the Cannon did absolutely phenomenal. Earned itself 2 chevrons, which is just fantastic by just it blew away those Marauder Horsemen and Throwing Axes right at the start, and then just did a ton of damage to the Bale Fiend and the Marauder Chieftain. So it, of course, earned its cost. And then the Goblobber made a ton of value, debilitating just a bunch of this infantry before it managed to get to me. And of course, once we got towards the end game, causing that significant leadership debuff with the Discourage effect. As for my opponent, his Marauders with great weapons did okay, considering their cost. The Marauder Champions did actually really well. Obviously, they're a very expensive unit, and they probably underperformed in this fight. But considering both of them took substantial damage before our lines met, both of them won the fights that they were fighting. They both managed to pretty much push off my Longbeards and just crush my Dwarf Warriors, and did a really nice job pushing through my line. The Mammoth didn't really get his chance to do anything. He managed to hide him really well, so that when he met my line, he was at full health, which is not ideal for dwarves. But by that point, his infantry line had taken so much substantial damage that he alone couldn't turn the tide, especially when you have a lord like Ungrim on the field who could solo the Mammoth, or at least bring it down substantially. And the Marauder Hunters got a significant amount of kills, considering there aren't that many squishy targets in my army. Like, the Dwarf Warriors are really the only cheap unit I brought. Most of the others were pretty expensive, and so, you know that's 58 kills across the 3 of them. It's pretty solid. And then these 4 units just didn't manage to do anything. I saw the Ice Wolves before he gave them a charge order. It looks like he moved them up behind me, but forgot to actually tell them to charge. So I noticed them first, which of course was a huge disadvantage for my opponent. If he had been able to run up behind me, take out the Goblobber before I could even turn around, that would have made a huge difference. And then the Marauder Horsemen and Throwing Axes were just doomed from the start because they started right in front of me. And then the Ice Trolls, of course, couldn't really find a good place in because I had an unengaged Giant Slayer unit waiting for them. But in any event, I hope you all enjoyed the battle. Thank you, Slay Turtle 07 again for the great game, and I hope to see you in the future. Thanks for watching, guys.